This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2024, thanks to our media partner Highways News, and sponsored by AGD Systems, Four-Way Consulting, Traffic Group Signals, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, PTV Group, Census Networks, and Starling Technologies.
Believe it or not, I'm not here representing UNEX Traffic, even though I should have chosen maybe other clothes for today. Today's presentation is really for ARTSM. There are so many acronyms in this presentation. I'm going to say it's not mine, it is Dave's, but we were working together collectively with the working group that we've set up. So yeah, I'm not Dave, I'm Andy. But yeah, so really today, looking at the sort of system-to-system interface for UTMC. And Darren touched on it yesterday, and we're just going to dig into that a little bit more. You're probably saying, another standards presentation. I don't think I'm going to take 15 minutes. You guys will be glad to hear. But let's see how we get on. So, our favorite topic, UTMC standards. 3 years ago, we had Dinik present, or now Swarco, talking about UTMC is dead, long live UTMC. So what was the key message there? Well, actually the title gives most of the messaging out there, that UTMC standard is obsolete. It has been around for what, over 25, 30 years, something to that effect-ish, 20 years. And actually it's very hard to maintain. And you're going to hear me say that probably a few times over the next 10 minutes. But equally, UTMC is alive and kicking. It's in the specifications that you guys write, and we still need to consider it and maintain it, and it is still the industry standard ultimately in the UK. And we've created this sort of simple mind map, if we want to call it that, of the UTMC standards and what it covers. I'm not going to go through it all, you'll be glad to hear, but ultimately it touches many parts of probably what a lot of the suppliers here actually cover, whether that's VMS signs, outstations, UTC systems, common databases. There's lots of defined specifications here. And as this is sort of aging, the horse is bolted in some of these, and people perhaps don't follow UTMC standards as perhaps they should, or different suppliers are in the market and they don't actually use it. So we wanted to focus on something that we actually could influence and change, and this is like an open session. This is not, you know, let's say UNEX presenting, this is ARTSM. So we're looking specifically at the interface between sort of the common database and strategy manager alongside the UTC system. Okay, so we've set up this working group within ARTSM. I'm going to stop saying that because it's hard to say. And ultimately, I'd say I want to focus on the UTMC standards between UTC and the UTMC system, which again confuses itself. We could help ourselves as an industry with some better naming perhaps. But the UTC side of things is very much, again, this audience knows this, the second-to-second control and the sort of fixed time or adaptive control systems, the monitoring, the auditing, the real-time nature of the system as such. When you've got this sort of common database, well, that's a little bit like everything else. That's what that mind map showed. We cover lots of different bits of information. And there's sort of 5 suppliers that are involved at the moment, but again, this is not an exclusive group, this is open. And we sort of said, some of us have UTC systems, some of us has UTMC systems, or both. And as local authorities, you guys want to be able to say, well, I want a TRL UTC system, or an IDOCS UTMC system, or I want whatever combination that you might want to say. And that's the whole idea of UTMC, ultimately, to be interoperable. So we want to make sure the interfaces between these things are up to date and maintainable going forward. So, why restart the conversation again? I know I'm not the only speaker on this topic. At TTF, you know, you have the UDG group that talk about this as well. So why are we starting it now? And it's probably the same message that people have heard before, hence why I'll keep this relatively brief. CORBA as the defined interface, or the sort of transport protocol, is basically obsolete, right? And it's hard to maintain. It's a blocker for people coming into the industry, and it doesn't really help us anymore. I don't think, and ultimately the local authorities perhaps don't even care what the interface is. It's just making sure that it's interoperable. So we want to make sure that that's modern and maintainable going forward, because the engineers coming out of uni that know how to code, they've perhaps no idea what this is. And that doesn't make it the easiest thing to maintain going forward. So as Dave originally wrote, it's obsolete, it's blunt. So requirements are ultimately changing as well, and the specifications that you guys do put out ultimately are changing, and security is obviously a key focus. We had an excellent session yesterday thinking about security, and again, we need to really bake this into the design of how we communicate between systems. Again, technology's moved on in 20, 25 years. A lot of systems are hosted now. We want to have secure by design ways to communicate between the systems. And as I said already, this sort of is a blocker for other entrants coming into the market to be able to have to use this ancient technology. I think I've made my point, so you don't have to keep listening to that over and over again, but it is evolving. So that's why we're sort of restarting the conversation. So what are we actually going to do about it? I think that's ultimately the important thing. So with this working group, we want to get the basics right first, have security sort of embedded in the design process, and ultimately sort of choose the right protocols to sort of how to communicate. And there'll be different types of data in there. So there'll be some very slow moving data, like configuration related data, or it might be event driven data, and people might have messages being fired out of UTC every second or an event driven way. And ultimately we want to be able to send those between the systems in a secure and efficient way. So ultimately, we're going to deliver a technical proposal of how we do that. That was, those 5 companies coming together to try and specify that, and we'll open that up for wider circulation and ultimately get feedback from the industry. Over time, we may seek to expand this, but as I say, we're tackling one problem, not all of them up front. And so we may expand over time to then start thinking about the other areas where it makes sense. If you think car parks, there's lots of different car park specifications out there. And now maybe with the National Car Park Platform, maybe that'll bring a different standard, and it doesn't need to sit under UTMC anymore. Or if you think buses, then there's ARTSM standards, or there's BOD standards, or SERI feeds. And again, we don't necessarily have to redefine every standard. Let's tackle the things that we actually need to tackle. And so I sort of mentioned 1 or 2 other groups already. So how do we play nicely together? We're not trying to say we're going to do this ourselves without any industry collaboration. And you start thinking, okay, the UTMC UDG group, this screen's the worst for acronyms. But so with the UDG group, I think this is the sort of current understanding and the sort of agreements. This may change a little bit over time, but this is kind of the understanding. They'll continue to sort of monitor the standard space, provide any guidance on sort of or emerging requirements. So if local authorities or different suppliers and so on are feeding into them, they can sort of say, we need to make some recommendations for improvement, but they're not ultimately going to create new standards. And those existing UTMC standards will then be moved into a topaz spec. So then they'll still be sort of maintained going forward, including sort of the IPR with that. But that's the first part of it. Where do we want to get to? Well, this working group, as I say, will develop the new industry standards going forward, and then look to use Topaz to actually publish that into the new standards format. Okay. Last slide. So roadmap, where are we? We sort of initially come together a few times now as a working group. We sort of agreed what we want to tackle first, and we set out this rough timeline, and we've had an alignment with the UDG group. So by the end of this year, we want to sort of publish our sort of secure comms framework, and then people will be able to comment on that. And then hopefully by Q2 next year, we'll actually say, well, here's the data objects. Ultimately, we want to use what we've got as a starting position and then build on that as we need to. And then we can publish that as a draft. And then hopefully this time next year at JCT, we can actually say, here is the new Topaz spec. And what does that mean for all the local authorities here? Please support us in this journey, because ultimately the aim is still interoperability, and you can then have choice between suppliers, but it means as suppliers that we can then actually maintain the software going forward is more secure, meeting the requirements that you guys need to meet. So that's kind of it. Not too much of a call to action yet, but hopefully this time next year you'll actually see a new specification. Happy to take any questions, and I'll direct them to my other working group members.